For 2023, Honda has completely redesigned their best-selling vehicle, the CR-V, and they've decided to go in a different direction when it comes to the optional hybrid system. The hybrid is now going to be standard in the Sport trim and the Sport Touring trim in sort of a hybrid sandwich. The EX trim starts with the 1.5-liter turbo, the Sport model gets the standard hybrid system, the EXL trim goes back to the 1.5-liter turbo, and then the range-topping Sport Touring model, which is what we're looking at today, has the hybrid system yet again. If you want to know more about the 1.5-liter turbo, that's in a separate video. In this video, we're going to be talking just about Honda's new hybrid system, why it's better than the last generation model, what kind of fuel economy you can expect, and whether you should Sport or Sport Touring or EX or EXL for your next CR-V. The first thing you'll notice when you approach this generation of CR-V is the much boxier front end. The hood is higher and everything is squarer than before. We also have more egg crate going on up front. The Sport and Sport Touring models get the blacked out trim across the front. Full LED headlights happen up here as well, but you'll notice no fog lights down below. I'm not entirely convinced about these large ovals up front, but you should know if you get the other trims, you don't find that. You find a more conventional front end design. This top end trim has parking sensors front and rear. In addition to getting boxier, this generation CR-V has gotten longer. It's 2.7 inches longer than before at 184.8 inches long, putting this now on the long side of the compact crossover segment alongside the Outlander and the Tiguan. This is a full 3 inches longer than the RAV4, and as a result, it has more second row room and more cargo room than that direct competitor. Ground clearance remains 8.2 inches if you get the hybrid model in the all-wheel drive trim, and we have 235 width tires on every model. Those are a little bit wider than the average hybrid. Out back, the theme is certainly not as boxy as the front. In fact, this is probably the most curvaceous rear end the CR-V has had in a while. We have the distinctive vertical tail lamp modules that we've found in every generation of CR-V though. Interesting twist, in the hybrid touring trim, which is the top end model, these are still not full LED taillight modules, so the turn signal is still an incandescent element. We then have some LED elements right here onto the hatch. Another interesting thing that I had not expected, the Sport logo back here is blacked out, but nothing else is. Touring, the Honda logo, CR-V, and the hybrid logo, those are all in silver. Also in silver, the dual exhaust tips down at the bottom of the bumper. This is kind of the opposite of most hybrids in America. The hybrid is the one with the visible exhaust tips. The non-hybrid is the one with the hidden exhaust tips. Behind the power hatch, we find just under 40 cubic feet of storage space in the hybrid and the non-hybrid model, but there is a big catch you should know about. In the non-hybrid model, the cargo area load floor moves to a lower position, and then there's also a spare tire underneath it. In this model, it's simply where you see it now. The reason the load floor doesn't move into a lower position is because the battery pack is located right back here in the spare tire well. So not only do we lose that extra storage space, we also lose the spare tire. That's pretty different than the closest direct competitor to this, the RAV4 Hybrid, which has a spare tire even in the hybrid model. Honda went in a different direction with the engine lineup in this generation CR-V than they ever have in the past. We now have that hybrid sandwich that I mentioned before. The base EX trim starts at the 1.5-liter turbo, basically the same engine that we found before. Then we have the Sport trim with this hybrid system. It's based around a 145 horsepower 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. Then if you get the EXL, it goes back to the turbocharged engine, and the Sport Touring trim, which is this top-end model, returns to the hybrid system yet again. This is now the second generation of Honda's two-motor hybrid system, and it has some important changes versus the last generation CR-V. The horsepower totals have massaged around a bit. This now gives you 204 horsepower total, 247 pound-feet of torque. That may seem like it's less power than the outgoing model, but this is rated on a new measurement scale. And if the old system were measured on this scale, it actually would have come in closer to 200 horsepower. So this is a little bit more powerful technically than the old hybrid system. The key to this hybrid system is a 181 horsepower electric motor on the other side of the engine bay. It produces 247 pound-feet of torque in its own right, and that motor is the one that's going to move this vehicle along in electric-only operation. And depending on the situation, it will also be moving the vehicle along in its own right at higher speeds. If you need a lot more torque, the engine will decouple, and this will become a serial hybrid, generating power via a smaller electric motor generator unit attached to the engine, sending it electrically across to the bigger electric motor on the other side. This feels a lot more like an electric vehicle than a RAV4 hybrid or a Sportage hybrid, because it is an electric vehicle until a clutch closes. And that clutch is the key change between this generation hybrid system and the previous system. This now has two different lockup ratios. It has a low-speed lockup ratio that can engage up to about 80 kilometers an hour, or about 45-50 miles an hour or so, and then a higher speed clutch that can engage at higher speeds to help improve fuel economy. When that clutch is engaged, this is going to operate in a parallel hybrid mode. The last generation hybrid system only had one ratio to select from, so this has a lot more variation available, and that low-speed lockup is why this is now rated to tow 1,000 pounds. The previous hybrid system had no rated towing capacity at all. Fuel economy comes in between 37 and 40 miles per gallon combined, depending on whether you choose the front-wheel drive model or the all-wheel drive model. All-wheel drive highway fuel economy in the CR-V Hybrid is notably lower than the RAV4 Hybrid, likely because this uses a true mechanical all-wheel drive system, not an all-wheel drive axle like we find in the RAV4 Hybrid. That makes this system more capable in off-road or soft-road situations than the RAV4 Hybrid. It also means it's going to feel exactly the same as the non-hybrid CR-V on ice, snow, dirt, etc. And that's not what we find in the RAV4. But that is the big reason that fuel economy is a little bit lower in this versus that, but it's pretty similar to the other mechanical all-wheel drives available in hybrids in this segment. The Hyundai, the Kia, and the Ford all have mechanical all-wheel drive systems as well. Honda has updated the front seat designs to be more supportive and more comfortable than the outgoing model, but the driver's side only has a two-way adjustable lumbar support in this top trim. I wish it was a four-way. We have a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion, pretty similar to the outgoing model, but the front passenger seat, even this top-end trim, does not have the same adjustability as the driver. The seat bottom cushion does not adjust for tilt, and it doesn't have the adjustable lumbar support. On the other hand, the driver does have a two-position memory on the door. The back seat is now one of the roomiest in the segment with 82.3 inches of combined legroom, although headroom does drop slightly over the outgoing model. That said, we still have plenty of headroom back here. With this rear seat in its most upright position, there are 8 different levels of recline. I still have about 1.5 inches of headroom, and you'll notice that we have a pretty flat floor back here, which is nice and convenient if you put people frequently in the middle of the vehicle. Although, speaking of the middle of the vehicle, the shoulder belt still comes out of the ceiling. I'll show you that in a moment with a lighter colored interior where you can see that a bit better. If I move over to the right side with this front seat all the way back in its tracks, I still have plenty of room back here for adults or child seats to mix it up. We also have a softly padded center armrest with 2 cup holders. Honda continues to anchor the shoulder belt for the center seat position right back here in the ceiling of the cargo area. Not only does that impact the cargo capacity of the vehicle, it also means that the shoulder belt is practically right in this person's face. Even if I were to buckle this shoulder belt into position and then sit there as a normal person would, that seatbelt is going to be really annoying for whoever is in the outboard seating position. And if you anchor a child seat into the center seat position, which is the safest place for a child seat, it can be skewed slightly to one side because of that shoulder belt position. As we look around the interior, keep in mind this is the most expensive version. We don't have a panoramic moonroof, just a pretty standard size one there over the front row. But we have height adjustable shoulder belts and two-way adjustable headrests, also contrasting stitching on the leather in this model. Speaking of the leather in this model, it is perforated, but the front seats do not offer ventilation, something that we do find on a lot of the competition. But keep in mind that the CR-V does not have a price tag as high as some of the competition. That is an important thing to balance out. Over here on the front doors, we have lots of soft touch materials on the upper section, harder plastics down lower, for instance around that bottle holder, and a style that is definitely reminiscent of the current generation CR-V, although apparently none of these parts are actually directly shared with the CR-V except for some of the climate control controls. As with the Honda Civic, this large cheese grater section that runs right across the dashboard is a defining feature of this interior, but I have to wonder how easy this is going to be to keep clean. If I zoom in on it, you can see that behind that honeycomb, we find some 3D plastic elements, and that definitely is going to be a bummer to keep clean. The air vents are well integrated into that section, however, and it gives the front a very clean and modern look. Again, I just wonder how easy that's going to be to clean. We have soft touch plastics on the upper section of the dashboard, a decently sized bin-style glove compartment inside. I was able to fit a 10-inch tablet computer in there. And then in the middle of the dash, we have one of 2 different touchscreen infotainment systems. This is the larger of them, a 9-inch system. We have some physical buttons over here on this side. And then if I go back to the native interface, you can see this is pretty similar to what we find in the Odyssey and the Accord at the moment. It does support wireless Android Auto and wireless CarPlay. Below that, we find 2 large air vents, again, very well integrated into that cheese grater section. We have the engine start-stop button, the controls for the dual-zone automatic climate control and heated seats, USB input if you choose to use that for your smartphone integration, a USB charge-only port there, USB-C. We then have the drive mode toggle switch, hill descent control, parking brake right there, brake hold, a pretty traditional console shifter with a B mode if you want enhanced engine braking or enhanced regenerative braking, however you want to look at that. We then have 2 large cup holders and a pretty soft padded center armrest that opens to reveal a very large storage area where you could easily carry, say, a gallon of milk. The one thing I found surprising in here is that we don't have a full LCD instrument cluster in any trim. Instead, we have a partial design where this left side of the display is an LCD, and then the speedometer is just an analog gauge. Moving out from there, we have a similar steering wheel to what we find in the Civic. Control for the heated steering wheel down there on the bottom spoke. Paddles on the back of this wheel that we don't find in the turbocharged model. These will control the regenerative braking. We then have some infotainment buttons, and then some buttons over here for the standard adaptive cruise control system. Clearly, the first thing we need to do with the hybrid is floor it out on the road, and you'll instantly notice this has a lot more torque and much faster acceleration than we find in the CVT model. The CVT model is likely going to be around 8.5 seconds 0 to 60. This is down closer to 7 seconds, probably about 7.2, 7.3. And that's all thanks to the electric motor, which from the start is going to give you over 180 horsepower and over 240 pound-feet of torque. Honda's new system will not only operate as a serial hybrid and a parallel hybrid as the outgoing model would, but the parallel hybrid operation has been expanded with the new low-speed lockup functionality. So if I were to floor this right now, the low-speed lockup is engaged, and you'll feel a shift as the vehicle shifts out of that low-speed lock and back into serial hybrid mode. The high-speed hybrid mode operation is going to operate the same as before. So at around 45 miles an hour here, if I'm just gentle on the throttle, it's going to engage that lockup and give me greater efficiency. If I dig deeper into the throttle, it's going to choose serial hybrid mode or that low-speed lockup, depending on what's being asked of the system. The result of this mechanical change is a much more direct feeling at lower speeds, or at moderate speeds, say if you're carving your favorite winding mountain road. You'll definitely notice that direct feeling thanks to that lower speed clutch engagement. And then of course at higher speeds we have the efficiency of the higher speed parallel hybrid drive mode. A hallmark of the system has been relatively lower fuel economy at lower speeds versus something like a RAV4 hybrid. So in the previous generation CR-V, if you're driving at say 40 miles an hour in steady state travel, the fuel economy was not as high as in a RAV4. That has changed for this generation. It does appear to be much better in those lower speed situations, but what does not seem to have changed is the higher speed fuel economy, say around 70 to 75 miles an hour. That still does appear to favor the RAV4 as far as fuel economy comparisons go. On the other hand, this hybrid system has a full-time mechanical all-wheel drive system. So if you are driving out on your favorite winding mountain road, you're going to get less torque steer than you find in the Toyota hybrid system. And if you're driving on snow, ice, or other road surfaces that are slick, this is going to feel much more traditional, much more like the regular CR-V, and that is absolutely not what happens in the RAV4 hybrid. That's an important thing to know if you do live in a snowy area. In the RAV4 hybrid, you have to do some unintuitive things if you live in those areas. If you start to sense front wheel slip, you actually have to continue digging deeper into the throttle in order to get power to send to the rear. In this vehicle, you want to just maintain your throttle application, let the system figure out where the power should go. It's going to reduce front wheel slip, send the power to the rear, and feel more normal, more stable than the RAV4 hybrid system. At this point in time, I don't have any 60 to 0 braking distances or handling scores or cabin noise scores, but this does appear to be quieter than the outgoing model. Honda says that they have added some additional microphones to the automatic noise canceling system inside the cabin, and they have improved some of the sound deadening a little bit, but this is probably not the quietest entry in this segment. We still get a bit more road noise in here, I think a little bit less than we find in the turbo model, but still a little bit more than average. That said, however, the last RAV4 hybrid that I drove was not exactly quiet either. I suspect this cabin is going to be quieter than that model. As with the non-hybrid CR-V, the best way to describe the hybrid model is that this is a really well-rounded crossover. It doesn't excel when it comes to acceleration or handling, etc., but it is really, really well-rounded, and that's not what we see in all of the competition. The RAV4 hybrid, for instance, gets better fuel economy, but there are some compromises with the all-wheel drive system, also with the handling capability of the RAV4, and the interior is definitely tighter. We do get slightly better fuel economy in the hybrid system that we find in the Tucson and the Sportage, but those systems are more complicated, so they may be more expensive to maintain longer term because they have a 6-speed automatic transmission rather than this more simple 2-motor setup that we find in the Honda. Now, on the other hand, the Honda feels a little bit different than those. This sometimes sounds a little bit like the RAV4. The engine is just doing its thing at whatever RPM ratio is required for the amount of power that the system is commanding, and then sometimes it's a bit more linear. Sometimes people can find that a bit disconcerting. But bottom line, this feels a bit more like an electric vehicle with an engine under the hood doing whatever the engine is doing than we find in the Sportage or Tucson, because that's the best way to describe this system. In a lot of drive modes, this is an electric vehicle, only the engine is the one generating the power. Now, I have to admit, I really hoped that that would lead to a plug-in hybrid CR-V, because this kind of drivetrain adapts very well to a plug-in hybrid vehicle. The electric motor is pretty powerful, 181 horsepower, 245 pound-feet of torque. If they simply put a bigger battery pack in here, you could have an all-electric driving range with decent performance. But instead, Honda is trying to make the hybrid more attainable, with lower sticker prices and more availability. And logically, if they decided to make a few plug-in hybrids, they wouldn't be able to make as many hybrids. There is limited battery production capability in the world right now, so this is a very pragmatic choice by Honda to focus on the hybrid model rather than a plug-in hybrid model, because there's greater impact. Building 100 of these versus 20 plug-in hybrids, you've actually had a bigger global impact on fuel consumption than if you'd built more plug-in hybrids. The trickiest thing, of course, for the CR-V hybrid is the fuel economy, and I have to come back to that. Highway fuel economy in this is definitely below highway fuel economy in the RAV4. You'll notice that there is a pretty significant drop in highway fuel economy for choosing the all-wheel drive option in the CR-V hybrid, and it's all because of the mechanical all-wheel drive system, most likely. But even in the front-wheel drive model, city fuel economy is quite high, highway fuel economy is lower than the RAV4, just due to the differing designs of these hybrid systems. So if you're frequently doing a lot of highway driving, if you're looking for that cross-country high-efficiency vehicle, you might want to look somewhere else. But if you're doing a lot of city driving, a lot of stop-and-go or slow-and-go driving, this is going to be quite efficient and equally efficient to a lot of the other hybrids, while giving you the benefit of the mechanical all-wheel drive system. Over our day of mixed driving out here in Southern California, I've been averaging about 34 miles per gallon, which is definitely below the average that we've been seeing in something like a Sportage hybrid or a Tucson hybrid, or of course the Ford and Toyota hybrids, which operate in a very similar manner. The Ford and Toyota hybrids are probably going to be the most all-around efficient options. If you're looking to buy the new CR-V, the turbocharged model is already on sale, starting at $31,110 plus destination. The Sport Hybrid trim is not much more expensive at $32,450, and you'll likely pay off that difference in the fuel economy savings within about a year to a year and a half. In addition to the hybrid system, the Sport model also gets the leather-wrapped steering wheel and 18-inch black wheels. Black, just like the ones on this Sport Touring model, although it's a different design. I'm not the biggest fan of the black wheel look, I have to say. I wish you could get the EXL appearance and the hybrid system, but you can't. Speaking of EXL, that is the next trim up that returns to the 1.5-liter turbo, and that's going to be $33,760. That's where you're going to find features like the leather upholstery and the 9-inch touchscreen infotainment system. The Sport Touring trim is the fully loaded model, starting at $38,600. All-wheel drive is standard on this model, so if you want the higher fuel economy, you have to get the Sport trim. Select front-wheel drive only. That will get you 40 miles per gallon. The other ones are going to be the lower fuel economy rating. If you're concerned about availability, fear not. Honda says they're preparing for a full half of CR-V sales to be the hybrid model, and that's why they've opted for this hybrid sandwich lineup as far as the drivetrain goes. I'm really intrigued to see if they can meet that goal. That's probably why they have canceled some of their other hybrids and why they're focusing on hybrid CR-Vs rather than EVs at the moment, because batteries are a limited commodity and they could build a whole ton more hybrids than a limited number of big battery EVs with the same number of core components. With this model of CR-V, Honda is also focusing a little bit differently on the segment than they have in the past. You'll notice that no model goes over $40,000. No model has a panoramic moonroof or 360-degree camera or heads-up display for the driver. No model has crazy wide tires. No model has a 300 horsepower engine under the hood. And that's because Honda is focused on the core, the bulk sales in this segment, which are right around $30,000 to $38,000, just as the pricing lineup would imply. Honda's decision to focus on the core of the compact crossover segment is quite logical. You can make more money by not having a base model. You also don't have to strip out as much of the interior in order to drive down the price. And as far as the upper end features and options go, there's an Acura RDX if you want some of those luxury touches. And that's probably why we find those luxury touches in some of the competition. For instance, a Kia Sportage. Kia doesn't have a luxury brand, so they just jam all those features on the Sportage, but you're going to be paying more for those features than in this model. Now, when it comes to fuel economy, I have to admit that over my day of driving this, fuel economy does appear to be higher in the Tucson and the Sportage and the Escape and the RAV4 Hybrid. This does appear to be getting slightly better fuel economy in the real world than the previous generation CR-V Hybrid, but as with the previous generation CR-V Hybrid, it's a little bit below the leaders when it comes to hybrid fuel economy, and of course there is no model available with a plug. On the other hand, the hybrid model is certainly the fastest version of the CR-V, and it's not much more expensive. Honda has really been artful in the way that they have aligned these trim levels, basically making the hybrid a no-cost option as you work your way on up the trim ladder. That means that more CR-V customers are going to be saving more gallons of gasoline yearly and be getting better performance while they do so. The hybrid fuel economy benefit is almost an afterthought. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. Would you be interested in the exceedingly high fuel economy that we find in the RAV4 Hybrid, and are you willing to give up handling ability, which is definitely better in the CR-V, and importantly, all-wheel drive capability, which is significantly better in the CR-V, for that improvement in fuel economy? You'll especially notice the difference out on the open highway, where the RAV4 is going to be considerably more efficient than the CR-V. Hit that subscribe button, find me at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of those social places, and of course, stay tuned because I will have one of these at home to run it through a full battery of comparisons and tests, probably in the next 2 or 3 months. And then I lie because these are not actually hidden exhaust tips. These are actually very visible silver ones. Wow, that was bad.